One of the fastest ways to expose a narcissist is to start treating them the way they treat you. And what shocks most people is how quickly they fall apart when the dynamic changes. Because the moment you stop over-explaining yourself, the moment you stop chasing, the moment you become quieter, calmer, harder to emotionally control, you suddenly see just how fragile their self-esteem actually is. And I really want to talk about this properly because I think a lot of people misunderstand what's happening here. When you're dealing with a narcissistic person, especially a covert narcissist, there's usually an emotional rule you slowly get pushed into over time. You become the one constantly fixing things, the one trying to reconnect after arguments, the one apologizing first, just to restore the peace. And after a while, you don't even realize how much emotional weight you're carrying because it becomes your normal. Then, one day, something changes. You stop reacting the same way. And this is usually where the narcissistic person starts unraveling. I remember speaking to a woman who told me that whenever her husband was upset, he would emotionally withdraw for days. Cold replies, no affection, very distant energy. And every single time she would chase him emotionally, trying to fix the atmosphere, trying to reconnect, trying to get things back to normal. Then one day she stopped. Not to manipulate him, not to hurt him. She was just emotionally exhausted. And suddenly he completely changed. He became reactive. She started sending multiple messages, starting trying to provoke emotional reactions, starting acting like she was being cruel to him. And she said something to me that honestly explained the whole relationship dynamic perfectly. She said, "Brandon, I realized he never actually wanted distance. He wanted control." And that's such an important distinction because narcissistic people often cannot emotionally handle their own behavior when it's reflected back at them. If they ignore you, they expect you to chase them. If they become emotionally cold, they expect you to panic. If they withdraw affection, they expect you to work harder for their approval. But when you mirror the behavior back calmly and emotionally detached just a little bit, they suddenly experience the emotional atmosphere they created themselves. And a lot of them genuinely cannot regulate through that. By the way, if you're new here, my name's Brandon. I have over 1 million people follow my daily insights across YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. I've researched relationship traits and dynamics like this for years, and I'm also the co-founder of the Clear Minds app, a hypnotherapy app that has helped over 2.3 million people globally. And honestly, if you find this video helpful, please give it a like and consider subscribing because I release videos every week around narcissistic dynamics, relationships, healing, and mental clarity. Now, something I really need you to understand is this. Underneath the confidence, superiority, ego, or emotional control, narcissistic people are often incredibly fragile. That's why criticism hits them so hard. That's why rejection can completely destabilize them. That's why emotional distance suddenly makes them obsess over you. Because the emotional dynamic they relied on starts collapsing. And I want to be really clear here. I'm not saying you should become toxic yourself. I don't think healing comes from becoming a manipulative person. But I do think there's something incredibly important about stepping back emotionally and observing what happens when you stop over-functioning in unhealthy relationships. When you stop chasing, stop fixing, stop carrying every conversation, stop absorbing all the emotional responsibility. And you just observe. Because healthy people usually move towards communication, understanding accountability, and trying to repair. Narcissistic people often move towards punishment, guilt, emotional chaos, blame shifting, or suddenly love bombing again because they can feel the control slipping away. And honestly, one of the biggest moments of clarity people have is when they realize something quite painful. The relationship only worked when they were abandoning themselves to keep the other person emotionally comfortable. That's not a healthy relationship. That's emotional survival. And this is why so many people get addicted to narcissistic dynamics without understanding why. Because your nervous system becomes trained to constantly seek emotional relief. You become focused on getting back to good, back to peace, back to affection, back to feeling emotionally safe again, if you ever did. So when you stop participating in the cycle, the narcissistic person often reacts very strongly because the emotional system they relied on suddenly stops working. And weirdly, this is often when they chase the hardest. Not necessarily because they deeply love you in a healthy way, but because they can feel the loss of emotional control. And if you've experienced this yourself, I genuinely love you to comment below, because I think a lot of people have had the exact moment where they emotionally detach slightly and suddenly the narcissistic person becomes completely different to what they usually are. Anyway, I hope this video helped. And if it did, I'm going to leave another one on the screen now that I think will help you even more. Until next time, take care.